Hundreds of charter school advocates will flood the state capitol tomorrow, pushing for equal funding footing with public schools. The charter community is looking for support from Governor Cuomo at a time it feels under attack by New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio. Bill Phillips, president of the Northeast Charter Schools Network, joins me to explain. It's all coming up as Capitol Tonight starts right now. And we're back on Capitol Tonight. Governor Cuomo's executive budget calls for universal full-day pre-kindergarten for all, including charter schools. Charter school officials are quite happy to hear this, but they still have some concerns when it comes to funding and a few other things. Also, the governor's budget does not include charter schools in the Smart Schools Bond Act, so that's a little problematic. Joining me now to talk about all of this is Bill Phillips. He is the president of the Northeast Charter Schools Network. Thank you for being here. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me
So
again.
it's like this weird mixed bag. Like, he included you in the pre-K piece, which is great, especially since New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio did not, and we'll get into that, but then didn't give you a piece of the $2 billion Bond Act, which includes actually money for the expansion of space so you could put all these new pre-K students in the classroom. So I find that confusing.
Yes. Well.
Yes. Thank you for coming.
Welcome to politics, right?
Right, yeah, good enough.
I think you have to look at these things incrementally. So the way we always approach it is trying to be treated as equally as possible to get as much equal opportunity as possible. So as you remember, last year we came and we talked to you about the fact that we hadn't been included in pre-K, and now we are, and we're grateful for that. I think what you'll see tomorrow is that you'll see a lot of folks talking about how the per pupil funding, there's still a gap between the district schools and the charter schools, and what we hope is that the governor and the legislature will help continue to close that gap. We are a little bit perplexed about the Bond Act, particularly since it is partly for pre-K facilities, and what we hope is that the language becomes a lot clearer that the charters are included.
Okay, so when you say tomorrow, it's your advocacy day.
Yep.
Tuesdays are sort of the traditional lobby day
Yep.
for all sorts of organizations. Tomorrow is the one that you guys will be here.
Yeah. Colleagues from New York City. This is a New York City advocacy day, so a bunch of the organizations and their families and their kids will be up here advocating tomorrow out of New York City.
And their kids, they're taking them out of school?
Some of them they do, absolutely. It's a wonderful civics lesson.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the reason why it's so curious, though, is because Governor Cuomo has been a strong supporter of charter schools. I mean, he supported Race to the Top, which included a piece about incentivizing, raising the cap for charter schools. He included you in the pre-K piece, which you weren't before, and so you know that's why I don't understand the Bond Act. Have you gotten any answers from the administration about that?
No feedback yet on what's going on there. And I think what you're going to see as well is I think you'll also hear tomorrow a little bit of a conversation about Mayor de Blasio, who's quite frankly being very difficult on the charter schools.
Right. Okay, so let's talk about that. I mean, actually, just last week you had this unexpected move by his schools chancellor to redirect $210 million worth of capital funding out of the budget. Well, they rejiggered the capital budget basically, and they moved it away from charter schools. Specifically so they could build more pre-K classrooms, just not for you.
Yeah, right. Yes, that is one of the interesting things. Mayor de Blasio is in favor of pre-K, but apparently not if a charter school provides it.
Right.
But to your point, this was a particularly curious move by the mayor. For a couple of reasons. When the mayor has criticized charter schools, the place that he's gone more often than not relates to the co-locations, the sharing of district space.
Which they're suing over, I thought.
There are lawsuits flying back and forth. Part of what's going on with those lawsuits is Mayor Bloomberg, there's 30 schools that were given access to space.
Right.
And right now there's lawsuits as to whether or not the charter schools would get access to that space. And that impacts about 17,000 kids. But back to the mayor for a second. So we thought the concern was about co-location. This fund here, this $210 million, which is about 1.6% of the total New York City capital budget, allows charter schools to build space outside districts.
So it would handle the co-location problem, or address it, is what you're saying.
It would help. So it's curious to me that if you wanted to be even remotely in favor of charter schools serving needy kids, and if you didn't like them using district space, you would think you'd be helpful allowing them to use outside space.
Well, if it's such a small percentage of the capital budget, as you say, then isn't it really sort of a symbolic gesture mostly? I mean, this is a guy who's really thrown his lot in with public schools. I mean, he's a public school parent champion.
Yeah, I do think it's symbolic. It's pretty clear that he's not in favor of having charter schools serve needy kids. I think it also shows that he's somewhat ideological about it should be district providers as opposed to multiple providers. Now let's come back to the state for a second. Clearly we disagree with what Mayor de Blasio's doing,
right.
and I think it's unfortunate. And and look, part of the reason I think it's unfortunate is New York City has actually got a national reputation for chartering. It's the second largest space for chartering, 70,000 kids. It has a national reputation for performance. I mean, you have a known researcher has basically talked about the gains being so high that it's closing the Harlem to Scarsdale gap. Huh. There's 50,000 parents on wait lists. So while we think the mayor is wrong for the position he's taking, there is mayoral control, they're his buildings. Let's not forget that the prior mayor, Mayor Bloomberg, what he was doing when he offered space was actually sort of fixing a defect in state law. The problem with state law is it doesn't allow charter schools to have money for their buildings. This is, so you're seeing the problem most prominently right now in New York City, but this is a statewide issue.
Okay, so you're going to ask the state to fix it, I would assume.
Absolutely. When I talk to you about more equal funding, the issue is facilities. I think we have to start looking at this a little bit differently. We've spent a lot of time and a lot of talking and a good bit of money talking about what it takes to make this stay competitive. And when we think like that, we think about what does it take to bring businesses here? What does it take to bring engineers, coders? I think we have to start actually thinking about what it takes to bring high-performing school operators here.
Okay, and I would agree with that, except that then you see stories like this one about the Albany Charter School paying more than $32,000 to a nonprofit foundation apparently of little value. This is from an audit from the state comptroller.
Sure.
Now, I'm not saying that public schools don't have problems, but you have for-profit operators in many cases operating these charter schools, and in some cases getting in trouble.
Yeah, the law 2010 actually made it so you couldn't do for-profits. That is a not-for-profit operator. I mean, I think there has to be some clarity as to what they're doing with their money there. But again, this goes back to performance issues, and I mean we have places all over the state, and I think frankly about places like Rochester and Buffalo where it's really clear the districts can't do it all on their own, and if you want to help fix those places, you have to help the districts and you have to help charters help them.
So you are saying that we're talking about, for example, Rochester has the lowest student test scores in the state after the Common Core curriculum was implemented.
Right, yep.
You're saying that you believe that if there were more charters in Rochester, that those test scores would be higher?
What I actually think is that it's an all hands on deck moment, and the charter schools are also popular out in Western New York. Typically when you compare the charter schools to their district averages, the charter schools tend to do better. I am absolutely not saying charters are the solution, but I am saying you need multiple answers to a solution, and charters are for sure part of them.
Okay, so aside from the facilities issue, what else are you going to be seeking tomorrow?
So the issue will be, it's about more equal funding, first of all.
Across the board?
Yeah, so to me, there's no way the state in one fell swoop can close that gap. It's about a 30% gap, but they can make the gap smaller. And what that does is that actually helps with facilities. We need to make sure that charter schools, if you're talking about equity, can serve pre-K kids, right? So we have to make sure that happens. And then it's just a function of making sure they're treated equally.
Has de Blasio fully ruled out the possibility of having charters do pre-K?
So he was asked in his testimony last week by Senator Diaz, and he implied that the current situation worked just fine as it was. And what happens in that instance is a charter school has to work with a not-for-profit, and they have to figure out a way to coordinate the two. What he's essentially saying is he doesn't want charter schools to be a direct service provider.
What he's essentially saying, but he hasn't said it, right? He hasn't made a Sherman-esque statement,
yes,
no charters could not have pre-K, because they've got a problem, which is clear because they moved $210 million from, they've got a facilities problem. They can't fit any of all the kids that they want to provide pre-K to into the existing public school structure.
Yes, I agree that is a problem, but I also think that if you were going to try to solve a problem and you were trying to give a better education for kids, be it pre-K or regular K, you would actually choose the schools that actually can serve kids, and charters should be in that mix.
Okay, well, tomorrow is Advocacy Day, and certainly not the last that we've heard about charter schools, I'm sure. I thank you very much for coming in. I appreciate it.
Thanks. Anytime.